Hi there, welcome back. Getting to the end of the restoration of the Grundig 90U. I think this is going to be the final video, and I'm happy to say that things have gone quite well. First of all, the whole frame that this radio had was in pretty good condition, with a few small exceptions. The grille cloth had some holes on there. This brass plate over here, which is supposed to have the Grundig label, was non-existent. There was also, I believe, a trim missing from this ridge over here, which I think should have been the same trim as they have on here. So I had to make do with what I had. This was painted with gold paint. Basically, the ridge was filled with gold paint. I think it looks pretty good, actually. But if I do find a bit of trim in the future, I can also just stick it in there. Everything was cleaned, and it cleaned out beautifully. And then, of course, here we had a missing Grundig emblem, which I believe was brass, and the Grundig label was on it. Couldn't find that. I might have to keep searching, but in the meantime, I painted it with gold paint, sort of just to cover where the brass would have been. That is definitely a temporary, but it'll do for now. Just to show you the grille cloth, it comes out perfectly. The cloth that I've got, I've actually used on a few radios, and especially on these where you've got these trims on the front, the grille cloth is just something in the background, and as long as it looks pretty accurate or pretty similar, it does the job. And this particular stuff certainly does. This is actually what it is. It's a fabric used to cover sofas, and I used it years ago to upholster some sofas. I had some left over. This was cut to size, glued in place, and so on. So with that out of the way, I was then able to focus on the cabinet itself. Now the cabinet is one of those sunburst type or starburst, whatever it's called, you know, darker, lighter, darker. And it wasn't in bad shape. There weren't that many real faults on it. A few touch-ups needed. So I decided not to actually trim this down all the way to the wood. I actually sanded the old lacquer off and touched up the spots that I felt needed it, and then I sprayed more lacquer on it. It's got a few coats of lacquer. I'm not sure that it's enough coats, but I think for now, I think that's going to do it. I'm quite happy with the result. You see there is a mark on there, but to go all the way down to the wood to get rid of that, it's just, for me, not worth it. Unless I was able to do what Dave Tipton did, which is to reproduce the toning by spraying with a spray gun and everything else, which I don't like using. I think this is actually better for me in this case. So that was done. The face was done, and we had a few more elements to work with, like the actual speaker. This was not in bad shape at all. It was just cleaned up. These little pieces of tape over here that they use to prevent the nut that holds the speaker from rusting and getting onto the grille cloth, that was covered up with that fabric. It's a fabric surgical tape, which does the job pretty well. The back cover cleaned up very, very well. And then, of course, all the nuts, screws, and everything else, all the hardware was de-rusted. I sprayed a bit of WD-40 on there to give it a bit of extra protection, but they've all cleaned up pretty well. So I'm ready to put all that together and then give the radio a final test. But as I was reminded, there is one thing I need to do on the radio first. As I mentioned, this radio goes up to 100 megahertz on the FM, which is a bit of a problem for me because one of my go-to stations is at 101.6. So just off the dial there. The other station, another station, the lowest frequency station that I listen to is on 88. So what I need to do is to stretch this dial. Basically, I need to stretch the tuning range of the LC circuit in there, both on the antenna side and the oscillator side, so that I can make sure that I can pick up from 88 to 101.6. And to do that is usually quite simple, but in this particular radio, it caught me out. This is the second thing this thing's caught me out on. The first one was the fact that it's got a bloody auto transformer and not an isolation transformer. Didn't really notice that at first. But the other thing is, when you do this, usually what you do is you set the the dial at a particular point at the bottom with the tuning capacitor fully meshed or fully open, and you tune to the bottom frequency. You tune the oscillator to that frequency, and then you also strengthen or tune the antenna side of it to resonate best at that frequency. So you're tuning the oscillator section of the cap and the front end or RF tuning section of the cap of the tuning capacitor. Then what you do is you go to the upper frequency and you do the same. So you effectively are, by adjusting the maximum and minimum settings of those of the elements that constitute the LC circuit, the tuned circuit, you can set the lower and the higher frequencies, and everything else in between sort of fits in. And they should track fairly well. However, in this particular case, it caught me out. And it caught me out because while there is a setting to maximize the strength at the lower frequency and the higher frequency, and when I say maximize the strength, I mean maximize the front end tuning, there isn't two settings to adjust where the oscillator fits. What they do here is they give you one setting, which I think was 91.5, and you adjust the oscillator to that setting, and then it is set to give a certain amount below and a certain amount above. In other words, you can shift the oscillator up and down with the same difference from lower to higher frequency all the time, but you can't set the lower and the higher to give you a different span. And that caught me out. But what I found is if I raise the frequency at the top, in other words, if I get it to receive up to 101, then instead of receiving from 87.5 or so, I get it from 88.5 or so. It's not strictly correct. I'll show you in a minute. I'll be doing it, and we can see how that works. But it will get there, and I left the final bits of adjustment out so that I can video it and show you. You see, here they actually tell you how to tune the FM oscillator and the front end, and they tell you to set it to 91.5, which is neither the bottom nor the top, and you adjust A to a maximum. Then they say 88 megahertz, you send an 88 megahertz signal, and you tune B to the maximum, and then you send a 99.5 megahertz signal, and you tune C to a maximum. Now, when you look at these A, B, and C, they start making sense when you look at the schematic. Here are A, B, and C. Now, what are they? Well, A is on this leg of the tuning condenser. That's a tuning condenser there. B and C are over here. So B is a coil on this leg using that part of the tuning condenser, and point C for tuning is a capacitor, a trimming cap, that's in parallel with that part of the tuning condenser. So what are they doing here? Well, this part of, or this tuned circuit over here, composing of that capacitor, that trimmer, and that coil, this is the front end. This is the front end. The antenna signal comes in here, and this is that front end that you're tuning. So you're tuning to a particular station here. And there you've actually got a control as to which part of the band you're tuning to. And when they say set it to 88 megahertz and adjust B, you set the dial to 88. In other words, you tune to 88. And you adjust B to get the maximum signal, so you resonate this circuit at that point. When they say set to 99.5, I think it was, and adjust point C, you're doing the opposite. You're then sending it to the other end of the scale, and you're making sure that at that end of the scale, by adjusting this trimming cap, you're getting the maximum signal going through. So this is just tuning the front end. Now, usually you would have the same thing on the oscillator section. In this case, they've only got an inductor, which means that the span of this oscillator is more or less fixed. When you set this at a particular point, in this case they're telling you it's 91.5, they know, or they mean that by trimming the condenser, the tuning condenser, to a minimum, you will get to the bottom end of the scale, or is it the other way around? Other way around, and to a maximum you'll get to the top end of the scale, if you know what I mean. So the span will always be the same, which means if you adjust this, if you set this to 92.5, you'll actually move the maximum tuning scale up by 1 megahertz, and you will move the bottom end up by 1 megahertz. So you won't be able to get 87.5 anymore, you'll get 88.5, for example. However, at those points now, you can still peak those two and make sure that at the top end and the bottom end, you get the best signal possible. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to mess with these guys, B and C for now. I'm going to see whether I can tune A to pick up that 101.6 megahertz where I know my station is. And the way I do that is I actually use something which is a little bit unconventional. I don't have a signal generator, an RF signal generator, that'll go to 101.6 megahertz. I've got something else. What I actually use is this thing. This thing is a little FM transmitter that you'd normally use in a car. Obviously it's been hacked and put in a box with an antenna and everything else, and a power switch. But this you'd use in a car to transmit a signal from your phone or MP3 player. Whatever audio comes here gets transmitted to whatever frequency you set on there. And then you tune your radio in the car to that frequency to pick up what's being played on your phone or your MP3 player. So what I can do here is I can actually transmit a signal from here. I'll send a sine wave just at whatever frequency I want. Now initially I need to send it to 100 megahertz, tune it to 100 megahertz, and then what I do is I start creeping this up to 101.1, 0.2, 0.3, and so on. And I keep adjusting that coil, coil A, and sort of follow this signal as it sends the signal higher and higher and higher. Try and follow it on the radio to make sure that it's following and that it can get to 101.6. When it gets to 101.6, I know that if I remove this and connect the antenna, I'm tuned to 101.6, which is where my station is. So that's what I'm going to do next. I've got my signal generator app producing a tone. We can hear it. Pause it for now. I'm going to plug in the little transmitter into the earphone socket of that. So that's now feeding the tone when I hit that into the little transmitter. Here's the transmitter set to 91.5, and we'll see what we're getting. Put the volume up and we can hear it. And that is practically spot on 91.5 over there. And I can also see that on the scope over there. So if I tune away, through it and away. I'm going to put that on dummy load so we don't have to listen to it, but we can see it on the scope. And now I'm going to change the frequency of the transmitter. I'm going to up the frequency of the transmitter. Let's leave it on 100. And now it'll help to hear it. I'm going to tune up till I get that. There it is. And it's practically spot on 100. Now, what I want to do, that thing goes as far as that. Let's call it there, is where I want my 101.6. Now I'm going to start increasing the frequency of the transmitter and see what is at that point. You can hear it. Gone past. That there, right? What frequency is that? That's a pretty good sine wave. It's perfectly tuned. And that gives me 100.9. That's not far off. So what I want to do now is I'm going to increase this to 101. And I'm going to actually adjust that core A and get that in line. So that is no longer tuned properly. I'm going to adjust core A to tune that. So I'm tuning 101 to that point. That's now picking up 101 at that point. 101, and I'm going to make it 101.1 and adjust it again. 101.2 and adjust it again. 0.3. So basically I'm just chasing the signal I'm at 101.4, 0.5, 0.6. Let's give it where we want it to be. There's 0.6. Let's go a little bit beyond, 0.7. That's too far. That there now is 101.7. That there is 101.7. If I set it to 101.6, it'll be just below that. In fact, what I'm going to do is that is right at the end. I'm going to give it a little bit more. I'm going to try there. And I'm going to adjust it so that that is 101.7. And I've just done that. You can't see it, but I've just done the same thing. That there is 101.7. Now, what have I done to the bottom end? Or rather, let's see where 100 is. I'll set the transmitter to 100. And I should have got it there, but it's not there. Let's go down. It's over there. So you see I've made that 100. Now I want to see what it is I'm getting right at the bottom at that end of the scale. So I'm going to tune down there. That's the bottom end of the scale. I want to know what frequency I'm getting over there. I want 88 minimum. Now this thing starts at 88.1, so I'm going to leave it at 88.1 and see where it is we're receiving it on the dial. Put the volume up and I can hear it, but if I tune it, I know that's my peak, that's my perfect tuning. That there is 88.1 and I've still got a little bit below that, so I should be able to pick up 88.0. So what I've done is I've basically brought the whole thing, taken the whole thing up a little bit. It no longer starts getting the signal 87.5, but in effect, it has done a little bit of stretching, which is not bad. So, 88.1 is over here. And it is perfectly tuned, as you can see there. Now what it tells me I can do is I can peak the input circuit, the antenna circuit, at 88 by tuning B. Now I can't get 88 on there, I'm getting 88.1, which is fine. So I'm going to tweak B to peak that signal. I'm going to transmit 88.1, set it on maximum and peak it so that I'm peaking the antenna circuit at the low end of the frequency. Then I'm going to change that to a they say 99.5. I guess I could make it a 101.6 anyway. Put it at the top and peak, what is that, C to a maximum. Let's see if it makes any difference. So that's at 88. That's the peak over there. And that needs peaking at B. Make sure I'm getting that right. Tuning the right one. That's the second one. See what happens. B is over here. Oh, it is peaking. You see, I'd actually messed with this when I was trying to stretch the band. That seems to have hit a peak just over there. That's dropping again. That's gone past. That's a peak. So I peaked that for 88.1. Now I'm going to do the same, and I'm going to set this at 101.6. And now I've got to tune to the top end of the band. That's over there. I messed with the antenna, but I've just adjusted the antenna a bit so I can get a stronger signal. There, that's my peak. Now I've got a peak C. Okay, let's see. Do I get anything out of there? Oh yeah, okay. Down the other side. And I think I've peaked it. Good, that's done. So let's see what we get. Well, here comes the proof. Whoa. That is 101.6. Brilliant. And I can actually tune almost off it, which is fine, gives me a little leeway. That is brilliant. Let me look at the other end now. Have I lost the 88? No, I've got 88. There's 88, showing on 87. There's still a little bit to go that way. There's my 88.
Foi dita, foi repetida durante a manhã, ganha então os 1000 euros de prémio. Ajustável, já inclui manutenção, seguro e muito mais. Cuidado para o novo projeto. Mas para então, Marcelino e Eduardo.
Ha! Brilliant stuff. I'm catching from 88 to 101.6 and a little bit beyond and a little bit before, which is exactly what I want. I've peaked the reception, the front end at the 88 and at the 101. So I've got the front end optimized. The oscillator's spanning the span that I want, which is perfect. And so this baby is ready to go into its clothing. And that's what I'm going to do next. And then at the end, I'll do a final demo of all the bands and all that jazz. All right? Stay with me. And here she is, folks. Finally done. Back in the chassis. Everything's screwed up and tied down. A little bit of light polish on here. The back is on. 2 new screws over here that were missing. The dial cord, the power cord's been cleaned. I like it. And miraculously, my wife wants to keep this one. She actually said she wants this one kept, which is actually a very nice surprise. So this one's probably got the highest W.A.F, wife approval factor of all the radios I've ever done. Very surprising. Let's see what she sounds like. I have the mini whip in. Let's try long wave.
Qui a accompli un travail gigantesque, voire même titanesque. Oui. Soit un travail médico-sanitaire, soit la vie.
That was long wave. Let's try medium wave.
Película y eso titularlo y eso en la radio queda fatal.
coreano prácticamente.
Pues mira, ahí tienes todo. Estoy de acuerdo contigo que está muy bien. Pues de hecho, no me enteré de lo de la vuelta a las clases.
Yo no me he enterado
tanto que no lo voy a contar. Digo, pero espérate, que tengo que repetir cuarto de la ESO.
por contigo lo que quieras. No sé que se fuera nada, pero fíjate que en cuanto digo lo acepté a todos.
Una evaluación muy urgente.
Let's do a final check on FM.
Quanto à equipa do Santa Clara, depois da vitória 3-2 diante do Braga na cidade do futebol, mantém-se, claro, no continente, será assim até ao final de...
Melhor marcador, o português Rodrigo Pinho, com 5 golos no campeonato, Correia tem 3.
Vou chegar ao céu, mas posso dar-te o mundo onde só entras tu e...
Daquilo que são neste nível que nós...
What you're searching for, then just stay.
Centros de saúde de Santa. Delícias, aqui sim, mais fino.
Continente.
Juntos na crise, juntos na recuperação.
Nestes tempos especialmente difíceis, a Renascença lança o super jogo.
Volta agora, temos toda a gente no retângulo.
And that brings us to the end of another restoration project. I've certainly enjoyed it, learnt a few things, the auto transformer, the dangers of the auto transformer. I built that little plug with the indicator lamp, which I've wanted to do for some time. This was appropriate. And the result is really, really nice. This radio is going to get used quite a bit. This is the first one ever that my wife has actually appropriated, which means it's got the highest wife approval factor of all the radios I've done so far. The fact that I didn't have to sand it down to the wood was also a bonus. It allowed me to keep the same tone, because I certainly don't know how to do this tone painting that Dave Tipton does so well. But here she is, and if you've enjoyed this, I hope you have. If you've enjoyed this, please click like on the video and share it, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. And if you want to support the channel directly, you can do so on Patreon. The link is at the end of the video and also in the description below. And I want to thank you all. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon. Keep safe. Bye for now.